Okay, so today we're going to talk about the fatherless household problem in America and the impacts that's having on our society. The impacts are very, very far reaching. And I'm going to pull from it's really a summary or a collection of studies that span about 20 years of research, and the stats are absolutely mind-blowing. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to discuss some government fraud, waste, and abuse, in particular with some defense contractors. And this is, if you want to know why we have a $1.8 trillion deficit, this is a contributing factor. It's not just defense contractors, it's everybody who gets involved with government contracts, and they fleece the government. Why? Because the government's the one with the printing presses. They can charge whatever they want, the government will pay it, and the prices have become so exorbitant that it's costing we the people, our money, our retirements, our 401ks are all suffering because of this inflation, because of price gouging, because of the excess spending. We'll get into all the nuts and bolts of it. That's going to be a very interesting piece. Then we'll talk about Tennessee. It's why I'm wearing my good old Tennessee hat today. Tennessee I'm back here in the motherland. I've been here for about a year and a half now. I grew up here until I left to go in the military. But Tennessee is passing some legislation that it's amazing because it is focused on protecting children. And we'll discuss that it's all about keeping them safe, but at least this is setting an example other states can follow. It's great for those of us who live here. It's why a lot of people want to move to Tennessee, but we'll talk about that and maybe some more stuff. I don't know. We'll see. I've got probably 4 hours worth of notes, but let's go ahead and get into it. I'm Jared. This is Continue Freedom. Okay, so the fatherless household problem in America. This is something that, I'm going to show you a video, and this video is one that was absolutely shocking to me, but I say it's shocking. It's one of maybe 100 now that I've seen that are very similar in nature. This is young men attacking women in the most violent fashion possible, but it doesn't matter if it's one person doing it or if it's 20 people doing it. The fact is, these types of attacks are happening far too frequently, and it shows a breakdown of our society. It shows a breakdown of discipline, a breakdown of law and order, and there's a lot of contributing factors, but I'm going to show this to you because it is shocking. And keep in mind that woman, or the person on the ground, is a woman. This is who's being attacked. Let's go ahead and watch this. There's going to be some language, so I will tell you to earmuff. Just be aware. Earmuff if you got kids or if you don't want to hear it. Okay. So when I saw this video, and when I see the other videos that are similar in nature, my first thought is, what would drive men to ever have such a lack of respect for women, such a lack of control, a lack of discipline, and how would they ever allow a situation to get that far out of control? Well, there's a lot of contributing factors. Some of it is cultural. It's how the culture because by the way, these were all black men, and that was a white woman. Okay, I have to mention the race part of this because the black community is one that's been more disproportionately affected by fatherless households than any other community. And I hate saying the word community. It is what it is. I hate that I have to. It's me adopting part of the lexic or part of the language. And I despise it. But I realize that this can only come from a severe lack of discipline inside of their households. That these as young men don't understand that is inappropriate behavior. That these as young men don't understand that it is wrong to mercilessly beat a woman and attempt to murder a woman. When you jump on someone's head like that, you are attempting to kill that person. So to take it to that level, it shows first and foremost a disregard for law and order, but a lack of discipline, a complete lack of discipline. Well, where does discipline come from in the family? It comes from the Father. And we've known this for thousands of years. And so I personally go to the Bible. I'm not going to preach. If you're not a Christian, don't turn it off because of this, but just consider this nuggets of wisdom from a very old text that I happen to find incredibly reliable. Let me put it that way. So from 1 Timothy 5:8, it says, "But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." This is saying that it is your responsibility as a man to provide for your family. So it starts there. You have to provide. You are the one who is supposed to take care of those around you. That is the burden that men have to bear and are supposed to bear. It's the burden I bear. It's the burden my father bore, that my brothers bore. We are a family of multiple men, and we have our own families, and it is our responsibility to provide. So Ephesians 6:4, it says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." It doesn't mean that you are sitting there prodding your kid, that you're beating them mercilessly for no reason. You're not provoking them to anger, but it's saying you bring them up with discipline and instruction. You give them the morals and principles. For us, it was the Bible. These are the morals and principles that you are supposed to follow. It does not mean that they are going to stay, perfectly between the left and right limits that the Bible has given us or that our Father has given us. But it means that you are supposed to try and keep them inside of those left and right limits. It is your job as the Father. Proverbs 29:17 says, "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart." It's impossible to raise a child without some form of discipline. Now, my dad was not shy about disciplining us, but he was the hammer, we were the nail, and he would put us back in our place whenever we were doing the wrong thing. I hated it whenever I was young. I didn't understand it when I was young. But as I matured and as I got older, I was thankful for it because I was around people who did not have that same kind of discipline. That does not mean that I was a terrible kid. I was a really, really rebellious young kid. But my dad kept me in line. He kept me, and to be perfectly honest, in a lot of ways out of trouble because he would come down like a hammer and discipline me. Not out of malice. It's not like he enjoyed it, but he knew that was his responsibility, and I appreciated it when I got older. These young men obviously have not had that. 1 Timothy 3:5 says, For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? This is just saying that you have higher goals and aspirations. For me, I believe it's things that God calls me to do. I'm supposed to do what God wants me to do, live my life the way God wants me to live my life. But if I can't keep my own house in order, then how am I supposed to do that? I can't do that. If I'm sitting here trying to, be the soft, gentle, masculine guy who's taking on female attributes and being the nurturer in the family, I'm not providing discipline and structure, because that is the perfect union of man and woman, is that women are nurturers, men are there to provide structure and discipline. We are better at it. That's just the way that it is. Men are better at structure and discipline. Women are better at nurture. And together, we make the household. And this is something that has been lacking ever since we started to separate women from their husbands via the welfare system, as one example, feminism as another example. Feminism sounds great on its surface, and in a lot of ways is great. But we won't get into the deeper problems necessarily behind feminism, but feminism essentially told women that they didn't need a man. You need a man to have intercourse and to have a child, but after that, you can raise a kid just the same as if a father was in the household or not. It's not that important. This kind of becomes the everybody loves Raymond family, where the woman is the domineering figure in the house, and the man just kind of cowers in the corner. And this is what feminism has told us. This is the way it's supposed to look like, and that is incorrect. It's absolutely incorrect. There is no correct way for a woman only to lead a family. It has to be first in the confines of marriage, but more just as importantly, having both of them there and giving the man the discipline. The woman can discipline too, don't get me wrong, but her strength is the nurture. So we as conservatives tend to understand this. We know that, yes, the family structure is important. Law and order is important. discipline for kids is important, all those sorts of things. But we have now started to compromise to the left, and we've compromised towards the feminist view. We've compromised towards, the welfare, the social safety net, things that have broken up the family. And we have, in our willingness to, or our desire to protect women, have erred on the side of just women having the children, or I'd say having the children, but getting custody of the children as an example. So in our family court system, 80% of the single parent households are women that head those households. Men get shuffled to the side. When you do that and you have a house full of nurture, women and mothers blowing sunshine up the butts of their kids, and no structure, no discipline, this is what causes that collapse. This is what causes kids to not have the discipline to say, hey, I'm in a public space. Maybe I shouldn't bash a woman's head in. It's the slow progression of it over time, over the course of their life. 84% of homeless families, by the way, are headed by women. Single mothers head up 80% of the single-parent households. Fatherless families are 4 times more likely to raise children in poverty. 71% of high school dropouts are from fatherless homes. High-risk children in single-parent homes have nearly 5 times greater chance of developing mood disorders than those in dual-parent households, even when controlling for household income, age, and depression status of parents. Data also suggests that children without fathers are 10 times more likely to abuse chemical substances, and 71% of all children who abuse substances come from fatherless homes. Data shows that upon the legalization of abortion, the fatherlessness rate in the country rises dramatically. For example, within years after abortion was legalized in the United States, Canada, and the UK, the percentage of children living with a single mother doubled. One study showed that girls whose fathers left home before they were 5 years old were 8 times more likely to get pregnant as adolescents. 71% of teachers and 90% of law enforcement officials state that the lack of parental supervision at home is a major factor that contributes to violence in schools. In a study of 56 school shootings, only 18% were raised in a stable home with both biological parents. 82% grew up in either an unstable family environment or grew up without both biological parents together. Of America's roughly 2 million prisoners, over 800,000 are parents, and 92% of those are fathers. There are just about 2.7 million children that have a parent in prison. In 2016, the average age of a minor child with parents in federal prison was 10 years old and 9 years old for minors with parents in a state prison. So this is, when you combine all of these things together, we can see that, by the way, I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but those were young black men stomping on the head of a young white woman. In the black community, the fatherless household problem has been exponentially worse. It's been worse than it's been in other communities. It's worse than it is in the white community. The Asian community doesn't really have this problem. Latino community, it's less of a problem. The white community, it does happen. Here in rural Tennessee, it is a problem. Having women having children out of wedlock, the father not necessarily being around is still a problem. But in the black community, as a country, this is where the real epidemic happens to be, because we've got 14% of the population carrying out over 50% of the murders and the homicides and the violent crime. So how do we fix it? We fix it by changing the culture. This is what actually has to shift. And it's going to take some legwork on everybody's part. And people are waking up to it. Don't get me wrong. There are proponents out there of, people like Brandon Tatum. He's an example. He's a black man who is immensely successful, but he's calling out the problems in the black community and the shift in the culture in the black community. We have Jesse Lee Peterson to a certain degree, although I'm not a huge fan of his delivery, but it is what it is. Everybody has their own thing. Larry Elder is another person that is really making some headwaves. Candace Owens, she's doing it. I'm not a huge fan of Candace Owens, but when it comes to this particular topic, she is taking the right steps. But it's going to take people understanding that extremely uncomfortable conversations have to be had. And there's some people that will be offended that I'm even mentioning this, but it is a problem that I worry about and have worried about for years, ever since I did my first video on this, because the way I see it is that community, when you talk about the ghettos, you talk about, South Central, or you talk about South side of Chicago, all these places that are ridden with poverty, drugs, crime. These are areas of untapped potential. And these are people who deserve to have that potential unleashed onto the world, but the culture has to shift before that can happen. And it takes security. We have to understand that policing must be in those areas. The left has said, no, remove the policing, change the laws so that the threshold for criminal activity is higher, which would lower their criminal numbers, obviously, but it's going to increase crime. You look at the shoplifting. So they said, oh, make it $900 instead of $500 or $200 or whatever it was. And now people are going into stores, they steal $900 worth of stuff and nothing happens to them. But it promotes criminal activity. It doesn't stop it. Well, as they have done this, similarly with drugs, they have said that we need to recriminalize or decriminalize all these drugs. And as a result, society got worse. Drug use got worse. Crime got worse. Well, what are they doing now? They are starting to reverse course and say that maybe we should start to recriminalize some of these things. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea that we decriminalized heroin and fentanyl because it just became more of a problem, not less. Now, I was a guy that for the longest time, I thought I was a libertarian, and I said, just decriminalize all of it. Make it all legal. Let people make their own decisions. And I understand now that that's a stupid way to look at it. We have to have law and order. Law and order is a component of this society, and there's nothing positive about fentanyl and heroin on the streets. There's nothing positive about it. It only breeds more crime, and it breeds more lawlessness. And it's death and destruction. If you want to talk about fentanyl, let's be perfectly upfront about that. But Oregon is saying that they will sign Tina Kotek, who's the governor of Oregon, will sign new legislation that makes possession of a small amount of drugs, such as fentanyl and heroin, a misdemeanor in the state. So moving to recriminalize that, again, it's not a felony, but it is at least a misdemeanor. Moving to recriminalize such substances roughly 3 years after the state became the first in the nation to decriminalize the possession and personal use of all drugs, according to a statement from the Democratic governor. House Bill 4002 reverses portions of Measure 110, a 2020 voter ballot initiative that relaxed certain penalties for drug possession. The new bill overwhelmingly cleared both chambers of the state legislature with bipartisan support last week. Now, what are people saying about this? People are saying, well, you didn't wait long enough, because the comparison they like to make is Portugal. Portugal was one of the countries that decriminalized all of their drug use, and they're saying that they've seen success in it. So we just needed to hold on a little bit longer. Everybody needed to just wade through the needles and the overdoses and the people defecating on the streets and the rise in crime. Just wait a little bit longer and it will get better. Well, that's a foolish, foolish way to look at that, because we in America we're chock full of drugs. First off, they're coming across the border in droves by the dump truck full, and they're getting dropped into our streets, and they are killing our citizens, 100,000 of them every year. They are ruining these major cities, these big cities like, Portland, Los Angeles, San Diego. All these cities are absolutely destroyed by the homeless problem, by the drug problem, which the homeless problem is fueled largely by the drug problem. And they're just saying, no, hold on a little bit longer. But lawmakers are saying, no, thank you. Let's go ahead and start to decriminalize this. This is the left realizing that their policy prescriptions are not working. And what do we say? Well, we say, I told you so. We knew it. We knew that this was going to happen. You can't legalize heroin and fentanyl and say, oh, well, no, now you can steal up to almost $1,000 worth of stuff from your local CVS and we aren't going to prosecute you. You can't say those things without crime and drug use getting worse. It's just the way that it's going to happen. Now some people would argue that it's the binge until, now that it's legal, everybody's going to use it, everybody's going to do it, and then it will kind of taper off. Well, that's not the way it works with fentanyl and heroin. People die when you start to do that. And some states said, you know what? How about a little law and order? Let's have a little law and order. How about we focus on security? How about we secure our people? In particular, let's secure our children. Well, Tennessee is a state just like that. I said I loved being back in the motherland. And I lived all over the country when I was in the military, and then I got out, and I moved into Virginia, of all places, and I did not like it. I did not like Virginia. You're always worried about losing your Second Amendment rights, or you're worried about, some weird bill passing that's going to have massive government overreach. So it's this whole massive red chunk of land, Virginia, with these little blue specks filled with the leftist of the left. And Tennessee is not that way. Tennessee is by and large a really good state. We have a lot of leftists moving into the state, and they are definitely going to want to change this state. But for now, we are passing bills like this, which is Tennessee saying that teachers can carry guns at school. The Tennessee legislature passed a bill on Tuesday that will allow teachers to carry concealed guns on school grounds. The idea being that they can protect students and themselves from mass shooters. Of course you can. If teachers are armed, the survivability rate goes up exponentially. Now, protesters, they filled the gallery at the State House, perhaps some of the same ones who protested for trans rights, which we're going to talk about in a minute. After trans school shooter Aubrey Hale massacred 3 students and 3 staff members at the Covenant School just 1 year ago, protests have been the norm for this bill, and some students skipped school to protest. Again, I don't understand what teachers are allowing these kids to skip school to go protest. I don't understand what parents, if these are high school age kids. Now, if these are college age kids, look, you can skip class. You're still going to pass. This has just become a money-making thing. Colleges, it's an absolute waste of time. But anyways, teachers who opt to carry guns in school would have to be approved, and their identities would only be known to administrators. Parents would not be told if their children's teacher was carrying a firearm in class. Why is this important? This is important because you don't want the kids to know who's got the guns. It needs to be a big question mark for some school shooter. Because all it takes is for them to walk past the wrong classroom, and next thing you know, they are deleted before they're ever able to carry out their sinister act. Or you want them to be, I think I said that right, you want them to be guessing, because the minute that they walk into that school, they should be in danger of losing their life at the hands of a teacher who's there to protect all those innocent children. So you don't tell them who's got the firearm. I think it's a great idea. Teachers who opt to carry guns in school would have to be approved, and their identities would only be known to administrators. Okay, I already read that. To take part in the program, teachers would have to have gun permits as well as undergo background and mental health checks. They would also be required to take 40 hours of training to make sure they are up to speed. The idea behind the legislation is to deter school shooters and put a trained, armed person in a position to protect students and staff from would-be killers. Democrats would say that controlling guns is the answer, but we know that that's not the case. It's not the tool; it's the person who's holding the tool. And having a well-armed or a well-trained, armed teacher. Let's think about this logically. We protect our politicians. Are our politicians all that valuable? No. Let's look at this is a great example of this. He's funny because of his quips, but Senator John Kennedy, he was questioning Merrick Garland the other day, and let's watch this video. Oops, if I can get my video to play right here. Always with the technical difficulties, aren't I? Okay, here let's play this.
You've been very outspoken about the need for more gun control. With respect, and if you don't mind me asking, do you own a gun?
I don't.
Okay. Have you ever fired a gun?
Many times.
Okay. Do you have 24-hour security?
I do.
Okay.
And that's all you need to ask. We protect Merrick Garland as if he's some national treasure with 24-hour security, but children in a school are left unprotected. They may have one police officer who's present, but by and large, these kids are left as a soft target. Merrick Garland gets people that follow him around. He gets to drive around in armored vehicles, but we aren't willing to put the same effort. Not that we need to drive kids around in armored vehicles, but we need to have armed people to protect our children. It's the nature of the threat. They're saying that we need to remove the tool. The tool's never going to get removed. There's hundreds of millions of firearms inside of this country. And most people that own a firearm own more than one firearm. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of firearms that could never and will never be removed from this society. The criminals will keep them because by their very nature, criminals are not going to obey the law. So if you try to confiscate the firearm, the criminals are going to keep them. The people who are law-abiding, who actually listen to the letter of the law, are going to be the ones without the firearms, and they are now the wolf is the only one who can attack, and the sheeple are the ones who are left undefended. It's so painfully obvious, and yet people like David Hogg still sit here and just whoop and holler about gun control. Oh, gotta have more gun control. Get rid of these firearms. Meanwhile, he walks around with private security. Merrick Garland walks around with private security, protected like they're some valuable asset. And children are left defenseless. Well, Tennessee says not today. Not in our state. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Tennessee. Now, on those same lines, when it comes to children, Tennessee is passing Tennessee bill passes saying parents must give consent before children can be taken out of state for sex changes. Now, I did a report not too long ago, and we were talking about sex changes of children in places like Washington and Washington State, that is, and California and other places where they were sanctuaries. These were sanctuary states, and they were sanctuary cities for child sex changes, meaning a child could be removed from their parents' household and taken to another state. And if a felony warrant was issued, then the state would not comply with that felony warrant to take them back to the state where the crime was committed or where the abduction was committed. It's absolutely wild that states were considering this. But on Thursday, Tennessee lawmakers passed a bill that would criminalize adults who help minors seek sex change procedures without parental consent. This comes after Tennessee voted to ban sex change procedures for minors earlier this year. Thank goodness. SB 2782, which was passed in the House on a 63-16 vote, I can guarantee you where those 16 votes came from, largely around Nashville and Memphis and maybe a few other places. But it was sponsored by the state Senator Janice Bowling, and would make it a felony offense for an adult to recruit, harbor, or transport an unemancipated minor within the state of Tennessee for the purpose of receiving a prohibited medical procedure that would alter the minor's biological sex or affirm a minor's gender identity. An adult who breaks the law will be charged with a Class C felony, which carries a prison sentence between 3 to 15 years and fines up to $10,000. I think that it should have been a mandatory minimum of 15. If you're willing to chop up the genitals of a young child, I believe that a 15-year minimum is definitely reasonable. Definitely reasonable. 15-year minimum, and I think it should be a $250,000 fine. You can work off that $250,000 fine, stamping out license plates for 15 cents an hour. I mean, kudos to you, Tennessee. This is about kids. You know, these sadistic people, these mentally disturbed people are raising mentally disturbed children, and the children are innocent in the matter because they are just being groomed. Essentially, parents who are saying that, you know, when you see these parents that have a 3-year-old and they say, oh, they use they, them pronouns, that parent is grooming that child. That parent is mentally abusing that child. Psychological abuse, 100%. This move to accept this lifestyle as if it's normal and as if it should be cultivated in our young children, this is child abuse. This is 100% child abuse. And anybody who's willing to take them to another state or take them somewhere and get their genitals mutilated, young girls who will never have children, who will never breastfeed their children, young boys who can never reproduce, that is evil. That is essentially saying that, you know, because they're saying that this is healthcare, this is transgender healthcare. That's essentially saying that Dr. Mengele's evil experiments were healthcare. It's the same comparison. To call it that is so deceptive to call this medical care. And Tennessee, again, says, not in this state. Absolutely not. We're going to look back on these days where we're fighting against transgenderism, we're fighting abortion and all these horrific things in our society. We're going to look back at them in the same way that we see lobotomies now. People think, oh, lobotomy. How could we have ever, in the 60s, how could we have ever thought that a lobotomy was, or the 50s or whenever it was a reasonable medical procedure? Seriously? Lobotomies? Oh, that's so archaic. And those same people will turn around and say that they need to mutilate the genitals of their son or daughter in order to affirm them in a mental health issue. They're affirming their mental health issue. It's like affirming schizophrenia or affirming bipolarism. Transgenderism is gender dysphoria. It's been known to be gender dysphoria for a very long time, and it was been classified as such. And yet we don't lean into any other mental issues. We don't lean into somebody's depression and help them become more depressed. We don't lean into their bipolarism to help them have, a harder time coping in society and all the issues that come with that. But for some reason, transgenderism, we do. Why? I personally believe, that this is because the medical establishment can make billions and billions and billions of dollars off of lifetime customers, lifetime patients. $1.5 million per person is usually what they're going to garner. So you're talking about billions of dollars at this point. 20% of Gen Z is saying they're somehow in the LGBT community. Does that mean that most of them are going to grow out of it or will eventually separate themselves from that as they mature? But these young children coming up in society, they want to push them into early procedures, children into early procedures, because once that happens, they are a patient for life. They will be taking medications. They will be reversing these horrific procedures for the rest of their lives. You can't tell me that's not evil. You can't tell me that's not nefarious. It absolutely is, and you can't argue otherwise. So at least we have Tennessee. Thank you, Tennessee, for doing your part to protect our children. Gracious sakes alive. Okay, so let's change gears and let's talk about government fraud, waste, and abuse. We know that that people charge the government more than they would charge anybody in the private sector. They do it because the government has the printing presses. The government can always print more money, so just charge them more. And we have civilian contractors, we have defense contractors who will sell a product to the federal government and then have, as part of their contract, the maintenance of that equipment that they also get paid for. So they aren't just selling the F-35s, or they aren't just selling the F-22s. They are selling the entire maintenance structure behind it, all of the parts, all of the pieces, all of the upkeep. They'll have things called field service reps in the Army for certain pieces of equipment. Those field service reps are the ones that are out there actually fixing it because we, the U.S. Army, were not capable of fixing it. And we had a contract where they would pay exorbitant amounts of money for individuals to get trained and to keep up that equipment. I personally saw it when we went to a new artillery system, and that new artillery system required field service reps. Well, to save money, I'm going to assume, I can't say this definitively, but we had one guy for our entire area of eastern Afghanistan, and this guy was running back and forth to fix these guns that were breaking all the time. Well, the company that makes them is getting paid for this, so I only assume they had fewer field service reps because they didn't want to spend the money. They wanted to keep their profit margins high. But this is a persistent problem when it comes to the defense side, because we spend more than any other country in the world by a long shot on our defense budget. And when we have aircraft like the F-35s and the F-22s, they come with a maintenance structure or the maintenance structure is the responsibility of Lockheed, as an example. And this is what we're going to watch a clip of, we're going to watch a clip of Matt Gaetz, and he's going to talk about this and give some specifics on it and make some pretty darn good points, as he usually does.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz.
The F-35 is our signature Air Force platform. What percentage of them are fully mission capable today? Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, if you give me a second, I'm going to pull up my card and give you an exact answer.
Okay. Happy to.
Your eyes are probably better than mine. 55% is the number we have for operational availability.
Full operationally capable. 55%.
for operational
Do you think
availability.
that's a good number or a bad number?
I think that's not a good number.
Failing.
I wouldn't put it quite in that category.
A D?
I'd ask General Alvin to comment on that. It's a number we'd like to see something.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because we got testimony that is a little contrary to that. Lieutenant General Schmidt, head of the F-35 program, gave testimony to the TAL subcommittee at HASC, and that testimony was that as of February of 2023, so a little over a year ago, only 29% were fully mission capable.
I think we need to talk difference between operational availability
Okay.
and mission capable.
Okay, so how many are fully mission capable today?
I do not have that number, but I would not dispute what the JPO has in front. And I would look
29%. So fully mission capable, 29%. You have no basis to dispute that, but you don't really know if it's true or false.
I have no basis to dispute it, but I would like to.
So you would agree that 55% is like a D, that 29% is definitely failing, right?
For fully mission capable, but
Yeah,
the
so, I
missions
mean,
that they can accomplish.
I go meet with the folks at the 33rd at Eglin Air Force Base in the district I represent, and they're doing a lot of, there's a lot of of mission there, but like even the guys who are also at Eglin doing test, they end up being at the very end, right? And I totally get why you want your operational squadrons to be the most capable, but then test gets put to the end, and then we're not meeting our needs. Like, I just think anyone watching this, one, would be surprised that you, General, don't know the exact percentage that are operationally capable, and two, I think people would be surprised that it's 29%. And this GAO report that I found on breakingdefense.com that I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record, it says that the reason we are not capable is because you guys at the Pentagon have given too much power to Lockheed Martin and its subcontractors for sustainment. Do you believe Lockheed Martin has been given too much power on the sustainment of the F-35?
I believe that Lockheed Martin has more power than in some other weapon systems. They do have the contracted logistics system that was part of the procurement plan that was put in place 20 or some years ago.
Well, right, I mean, but it's not working. If the Lockheed Martin built the F-35, only 29% of them are fully operationally capable right now.
So that in and of itself, this is a massive company worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, Lockheed Martin. They provided a platform, an airframe for our military, for our Air Force, and yet they said, as a contract, we are going to maintain that aircraft for you. And yet the best they can muster is 29% of those aircraft actually flying as they are intended to fly, actually being used as they are intended to being used. That in and of itself is fraud, waste, and abuse. That is a company not meeting its contract obligations. And when we make these huge purchases, whether it's the F-35 or the F-22, or it's an artillery system, or it's a tank system, or it's whatever, if a company doesn't meet the requirements, if they aren't able to meet the service requirements, then we need to find an alternate way to sustain those platforms, those airframes, or those pieces of equipment that is in the best interest of the taxpayers. But when you only have a few defense contractors that are providing these massive platforms, so whether you're talking about the F-22 or the F-35, they know that they have us over the barrel. They know that they have us under their thumb because they've invested billions, tens of billions of dollars into these aircraft, hundreds of billions of dollars into these aircraft, and there is no other way for them to get service. So it behooves that company to say, you know what, we can give you 30% of them. We can keep 30% of them in the air. The rest of them, yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. You can pay us more money. You can pad our pockets even more, and maybe then we'll meet our contract obligations. And this is rampant. I saw this when I was deployed. I've seen this over the past 20 years or 20 plus years. This is a constant problem with defense contractors, especially when you're talking about massive platforms like that, because they don't seem to have an interest in meeting those contract obligations. The only thing that they really care about is the next one. What's the next thing that we're going to sell them that's going to hamstring the American people into a platform that's going to ensure hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in our pockets over the next 10 years, 20 years? Because you can look at the F-16s, at the F-15s, at the F-18s. These were Cold War aircraft, and they are still around. People are still being paid to maintain them, to provide the parts for them. We are keeping entire businesses operational because of these aircraft. The same thing is true with the F-22 and the F-35. And that's Boeing and Lockheed. It's absolutely wild. But on this same note, so let's go back to these clips. This is how they are bending us over the barrel, so to speak.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Florida.
That is a strategic failing on our.
Sorry about that. Let's
I yield
start
back,
from the
Mr.
beginning.
Chair.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I was struck by a statement you just made, and I just want to touch on Representative Gates's concern about readiness. I'm the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. I mean, I understand there is a quality over quantity argument, but the basic issue is if they can't fly, that is a strategic failing on our part. And I think the Pentagon has become so focused on, I know it's a balance, I know there's a pendulum swing, but on making these kind of handmade, bespoke, high-tech Ferraris. But sometimes you need a fleet of pickup trucks. And you certainly need, whether they're Ferraris or pickup trucks, that can operate in the desert and can operate out in the corrosive environment in the Pacific. So let's talk about some of your pickup trucks. The Air Force owns and operates DoD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, they need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000.
The $100 bag of bushings, and we paid $90,000 for it. This is where the fraud, waste, and abuse comes back to bite us. They have us over the barrel. They say we are the ones that sustain it. You've now got to explain to your taxpayer. You would have to explain to the taxpayer why you paid into this massive program that bought these big, beautiful, high-tech jets, and why you're scrapping the program because we can only keep 29% of them up in the air. And so on those same lines, now you got to buy these bushings for $90,000. $100 worth of bushings for $90,000. This is where oversight, I mean, we have some hard decisions to make, people. In the coming years, we have some very hard decisions to make because we can't keep spending at the rate we are spending. $1.8 trillion more than we are making in any given year in tax revenue. Tax revenue is at about $4 trillion. We're spending $5.5 trillion. We cannot continue at the same level. Cuts have to be made. You know, I've been talking on a couple other podcasts about being being deep into this book about Calvin Coolidge and how he was the whole government at the time, the massive chunk of the government of the legislature was focused on cutting spending because we were a few billion over what we were bringing in tax revenue. We have to go back, I believe, are going to have to talk about going back to days where the war, if you want to pay for a war in Ukraine, you got to sell bonds. You can't just keep printing out $60 billion here, $50 billion there, $20 billion here, and give it to these foreign countries. If people want to invest in the war in those other countries, sell them a bond. And you can fund it that way. But just taking away from future generations by printing the money is destroying us. Allowing defense contractors to fleece the American people is destroying us. Allowing major corporations who in these public-private partnerships who are in bed with the federal government, it's destroying us. And it's destroying future generations. It's destroying all the wealth that we have accumulated up to this point. It is wrecking our savings. It's wrecking our 401ks. It's forcing us to the point of very, very late retirement. You know, Ben Shapiro came out a few months ago or a few weeks ago maybe. And he said, we shouldn't be talking about retiring at 65. You should be retiring much, much later. Yes, we're going to have to. Well, okay, fine. We can have an argument about that. But the fact remains we will have to increase the retirement age. Social Security that people have paid, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars into Social Security over the past, you know, over their lifetime are not going to get that money. That is an insolvent program. And the only way they're going to get it is for us to print more money to give to them in their $1,500 a month or their $2,000 a month or whatever they're going to get. Some paltry amount of money for working their entire life in a system that the government had just essentially robbed them. The government has robbed them. These are the tough decisions that have to be made. Where is the cut going to come from? It's going to mean that we got to stop buying $90,000 bushings. And we've got to stop paying $5,000 for our toilet seats. There you go. Those are my thoughts for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments below. We're on X Locals, Rumble, and YouTube. You can, go to continuefreedom.com, sign up for my mailing list if you prefer that. I'll be sending out some emails here, in the coming months. I appreciate you guys. Love you all. God bless you. God bless America. We'll see you in the next one.